Renaissance education. Um, so we talked about the fact that during the medieval periods, most education, most books were written in Latin, okay, and how difficult it was. There was a very, very high illiteracy rate. Very few people could read. And in part, it was because not only did you need to know how to read, but you also had to know another language. In order to read, you had to know Old Latin. So in this period, we're going to see changes in education. One of the changes we're going to see is that books start to be made in the vernacular language. They start to be printed in the language of the people, the language that the people speak. So in England, the books would be written in English. In Germany, it would be in German. In Italy, Italian, France, French, so on. Also during this period, education becomes more secular. Secular means not religious. Okay, so no longer is all education about religion. They stopped teaching like miracles in school. Um, Not that they stopped believing in miracles, and specifically we're talking about like biblical miracles. Um, but they said that doesn't belong in school, right? In school, we don't want to teach miracles, we want to teach facts. Okay, we don't want to teach about magic or this type of thing. Let's focus on the facts. And we begin to see what is now liberal education, liberal studies. I'm a liberal arts major. I'm a history major. I teach the liberal arts. The liberal arts were things like history, public speaking, literature that they started to teach in secondary education, which sometimes were colleges, but sometimes was also just high school. Um, Back then, education was mostly for the rich. It was not something that the average peasant or serf was able to get. Um, and also, I guess in some cities, I think Florence or some of the cities, they would try and educate all young people, but mostly it was something that only the upper class or the rich would be able to get. Um, and it was mostly like the equivalent of K through 5. It was grammar school. We would just teach the very basics. And then secondary, which would be like middle school or high school or college, was definitely more for the rich only. Its goal was also to create well-rounded citizens. You know, the Renaissance valued well-rounded people. They always say that, like Leonardo da Vinci was the ideal Renaissance man. Not only was he a great artist, but he also was an inventor. He also um, he did a lot more than just art. So they wanted well-rounded individuals. They taught physical education, archery, this kind of thing in school as well. Um, and we then get to the printing press, and I just want to. Um, so this printing press, a few years ago. Let me just say this. A few years ago, in my AP Euro class, I did this thing, and it didn't turn out to be extremely successful. But I thought it was a cool idea. And what I tried to do was I tried to have an NCAA style tournament of the most important Europeans in our course of studies. And I had like 32, and then each person would be given one. And there was and brackets, right? And then we would go head to head in kind of debates. And then I would have the students, I would have them rank the person, and we would try and figure out who the most important was. And I had this student who was a really bright kid. And he says, Johannes Gutenberg is my number one by a long shot. And let me tell you why. And I was surprised. I don't even think I had him on the list. I had Napoleon, Voltaire, maybe Leonardo da Vinci from this period, right? But why Johannes Gutenberg? And he made such a good argument that I had to redo my entire list and put Johannes Gutenberg in that list, because the truth is that Johannes Gutenberg, the printing press, could be the most influential invention of this period, maybe of the next few hundred years, because back then they didn't have a lot of books. And Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press, which is kind of like a stamp. And when I say stamp, I don't mean the kind of stamp that you put on your mail to send out into the mail. What I'm talking about is a stamp like the old school elementary stamps, right? Rubber stamp, pound it into ink, slap it on a piece of paper, and you get the image that was on the rubber stamp on the paper. It's funny because normally when I teach live and I'm with my students, I will actually move around during this time I teach this, and I will stamp people's paper with these like middle schooly stamps I have. Like, good job, you're great, and then my students sometimes they'll get the stamps and be like really happy, like, oh, this is so great. He really thinks I'm doing a good job, and you are doing a good job. But I didn't do it for that. I would stamp them to show them what the printing press looked like. Okay, so it would be this kind of wood square, page side square, and there would be these metal rods that went down. And it was called movable type print because you would have on the side, you would have all of these letters, okay? And you would spell out words on the metal rods, which you would then lock into place, stamp on ink, and slap down on a piece of paper, and that would create a page of a book. And when you were done, right, you would stamp off maybe, I don't know, 100 copies of that book. When you were done, you would just take the letters off those kind of metal rods where they would lock into and be used to spell words. And you would do the next page, right? And this is how books were made during the time period using movable type print. And it really dramatically increases the amount of books that are available. Now, understanding that a lot of these books are now coming in the vernacular language. I think the Bible was the first book that he printed because it was such a popular book. Um, Now you can actually read the Bible. Right? No longer do you have to go to church to hear what's in the Bible because most people couldn't read. But you could read the Bible, or maybe you could read Dante's story of the journey to heaven, or maybe Canterbury Tales, or one of the books of the era. Maybe you want to go back and you want to read some Socrates or some Aristotle or some Plato or maybe some Virgil, right? Ptolemy. It opened up the door for more books to be made. And now that they're being made in the vernacular language, we're seeing the percentage of people who can read books, who want to read books going up. We see more and more people actually reading books, actually now trying to learn how to read. And it does, it dramatically changes society. And then when you say, okay, well, and also now in the cities, the big cities, especially our Florence, our Venice, our Milan, our Genoa, we're seeing free public education for the kids of those cities, which again are only about 5% of the population lived in cities back then. But what we're seeing is the very beginning of a more educated Europe. Okay, and the availabilities of books are as important, if not more important, than anything of this era when it comes to the shift that this makes in European society from an uneducated society where people are living in the feudal system, where most people are peasants and living in extreme poverty and never, getting out, to all of a sudden people accomplishing things. Well, how are you going to accomplish something if you can't read? If you're uneducated, you're not probably going to accomplish anything. I mean, it takes high level of education to make advances in science or advances in technology of the period that will move society forward. So the printing press is incredibly important also to the Renaissance, to the changes that took place in the Renaissance. And keep that in mind, that really the main reason we study this is because this moment changes European society. And that will lead to 500 years of change in Europe, and then eventually Europe will change the world.